We're at the quarter-final stage of the Best All-Ireland winners from the last 16 seasons. We're at the third quarter-finals, saying 2016 Dublin against 2008 Tyrone. So have a look at ourgame.ie if there's any videos you've missed at this point. Michael Verney, what do you think here? What's the first thing that stands out when you try and compare this 2016 Dublin team who beat Mayo after a replay? I mean, a thrilling couple of games against the Tyrone team that I think Martin Breheny at the time, he described it as a clash for the decade, the most decade-defining clash since Dublin and Kerry in the late 70s when Tyrone beat that Kerry team, especially after an 8-game saga. Any particular trends come to mind when you think of these two teams?
No, but I'll tell you what, when you look back at Dublin's 2016 win, it's really the one year where you look at, did Dublin win, or did Mayo play a massive role in Dublin winning? Like up until 2016, there hadn't been an own goal scored in an All Ireland final. Then we have two own goals scored in one game. Then we have the goalkeeper situation in the second game with Rob Henley starting and getting black carded and David Clark coming on and Dublin scoring a penalty then straight away as a result of it. It was more, I think the win was more to do with Mayo than it was with Dublin. You obviously had Cillian O'Connor missing that free. I think there was 75 and a half minutes on the clock, missing the free to draw it. Mayo had that game both games within their hands, I would say. Like if you look at it in the drawing game, the two own goals I think was near, like Dublin scored 2-9 that day. So like 1/3 of their total was two own goals scored by Mayo. Don't think they had anything scored from play themselves until maybe late in the first half that day. Whereas if you look at it with Tyrone, and we talked about it on air, Tyrone were obviously beaten. Tyrone was obviously beaten in an epic by Down in the Ulster Championship. And then I'm sure you'll go into it a bit more. Like the move of Sean Kavanagh going up to the full forward line, like totally changed their season.
Yeah, and that'd be like, let's jump to that potential matchup. If Sean Kavanagh was full forward against Johnny Cooper or Philly McMahon, and he was in his pomp at the time, obviously, as I said, one footballer of the year, would those two lads have been able to keep into him with really good ball? Because we saw how Johnny Cooper's struggled on David Clifford last year, and most players will. But similarly for Colin or Sean Kavanagh of that era, he was a very different player to Clifford, but equally almost unstoppable at the time on the front foot, when he was getting ball in.
Yeah, he wasn't a full forward. He was a midfielder converted to full forward. So they were able to give him a variety of different ball in, predominantly, that higher kind of angle type of ball in. The type of ball that would have been kicked into Donny even those around that era. But it's funny, the old full forward was back in vogue around that time. And in fairness to Mickey Harte, realised that they needed to do something different, and it 100% worked. Kavanagh got 5 points in the All Ireland final, was essentially the difference maker. Would have been very, very interesting. We obviously saw how Philly worked on Aidan O'Shea in 2015. Philly scored 1-2 off Aidan O'Shea in the All Ireland semi final in 2015. So there's nothing to say that he wouldn't have been able to react to Kavanagh going in there and done a job on him similarly. But I thought it was interesting. You mentioned Johnny Cooper there. Like I think you have two very, very similar players on opposite teams here. Tyrone 08, you have Ryan McMenamin. Dublin 16, you have Johnny Cooper. Both fond of the talking and different, maybe the dark arts of the game, which I have to admit I absolutely love, because you need those characters in the game. You need those lads that are willing to go to any lengths to win and to keep their man down. If it was a straight shootout between the two of them, who you'd have number 2 on your team, who would you take?
I think Cooper's probably got more versatility. You could play him in a number of different positions, whereas Ricey to lock down most forwards. Yeah, I mean, God, he's not going to
work. It's so hard to find. The way football has gone now, there's not as many man markers as there used to be in the game. Like you're basically saying put McMenamin on the opposition's best forward, and he'll absolutely torment them for the day. Do you know what I mean? But then you have Johnny Cooper. I agree with what you're saying. Is you can play him 2-3 and you can play him 5, 6, or 7. Do you know what I mean? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He's probably more versatile in that regard. But if you were talking about who you wanted to do a man marking job, I think I'd take Ricey. If you wanted someone for versatility and flexibility, I'd probably be taking Cooper. But I think it's an interesting matchup because I think every team needs one of those. Every successful team needs one of those guys that doesn't really care what you have to do to nullify one of the opposition's best players. They'll do it, and those two guys have done it for a long time throughout their careers.
Yeah, they're both dogs. I'd say there's a slight bit more of a dog in Ryan McManaman, but not even by much. So that's not a slight on Cooper's dogging abilities, and I can't believe I said that, but you know what I mean. Whereas I think Cooper has a slight bit more football. Now I'm just going to run through the teams here so we can get a flavour of what both of these teams were giving us at the time. So in goals, Stephen Cluxton, obviously, Philly McMahon, Johnny Cooper, Michael Fitzsimons. Now this is the replay. James McCarthy, Keane O'Sullivan and John Small. Jack McCaffrey was away this year. Brian Fenton and Paddy Andrews, who obviously didn't really start midfield. Paul Flynn, Kevin McManaman, Kieran Kilkenny, Dean Rock, Diarmuid Connolly and Paul Mannion. Then if we jump onto the Kerry team in a slightly different format here. Pascal McConnell, Joe McMahon, Justin McMahon, Conor Gormley, Davy Hart, Philip Jordan, Ryan McManaman, Collie Holmes, Enda McGinley, Brian Dewar, Ryan Mellon, Martin Penrose, Tommy McGuigan, Sean Kavanagh and Collie McCullough. So, geez, they're two unbelievably strong teams. What about the Pats to the final? Now Tyrone, they lost to Down after a replay, so they had to go the backdoor route. Dublin absolutely coasted through Leinster, but then they had a couple of tough games. Donegal weren't the Donegal of 2014, but the way they held them at arm's length, it wasn't a Jim McGuinness team, it was a Rory Gallagher team. They weren't as impressive, but they completely held them at arm's length, won by 5 points, nullified Michael Murphy out of the game. Then they played Kerry, and it was the game where apparently Cluxton malfunctioned, because some of the kickouts went awry. Now he eventually got right in the second half, but Kerry put up a serious performance. And in the final, obviously twice they had to play a Mayo team that during this era they should have won All Ireland. I think we all know that. So pretty tough after Leinster. Whereas for Tyrone, drew it Down, lost to Down. Not overly impressive there. Follow after that, Louth, Westmeath.
I think the Down game was extra time. Actually, I think it went extra time.
And a replay.
Oh, did it as well? Yeah.
And then you had Louth, Westmeath, Mayo, Dublin, Wexford, Kerry. I think in relative terms, when you tot it all up, Dublin actually probably had a harder route.
Definitely the last 3 games, I would say. Definitely over the last 3 games.
And crucially, that's when there's no kind of backdoor system. They had the hardest games when everything was on the line, whereas Tyrone's, they had a couple of soft ones.
And they were able to build up a bit of momentum through the back door again and try these things, try Sean Kavanagh and try these different lads. Like Dublin beat a Donegal team that won All Ireland in 12 and had beaten Dublin in 14 and been to an All Ireland final in 14. They beat a brilliant Kerry team. Obviously, were champions 2 years before that. In one of the great games, it has to be said, that was the day Connolly kicked that point. I'll never forget it underneath the Hogan off his left foot, which you just shouldn't be able to do with your unnatural foot. And in fairness to them, like I painted the picture of, that Mayo almost gave it to them in the All Ireland final or played their part in it. But as I said, we said several times before, the great teams seem to always find a way. And when it was down the clutch and the game was there to be won, Dublin were always able to win it and won it again that day. I'd say if you're looking at the knockout runs of the two of them, I'd say Dublin would have to be more impressive.
There's some serious dogs in that. We already talked about one dog, but the McMahons are in there. Great half back line with Davy Hart and Philip Jordan. But of course the Dublin team has just so many star players also. Brian Fenton was named Sunday Game Footballer of the Year. Now it ended up being Lee Keegan with the All-Stars Footballer of the Year. So I think Brian Fenton in his pomp then, and obviously he's been in his pomp throughout that time. Any other matchups stand out? Like Brian Dewar was brilliant that year, scored that incredible point from the right wing with his right foot when he was absolutely blazing up the line. Anything particularly stand out to you here?
Brian Fenton, Hub Hughes came on at half time for Tyrone and kind of turned the All Ireland final, helped turn it. Would have been interesting to see. Kevin Hughes was, he was just a bit of a man mountain, and he was brilliant at nullifying the opposition's really strong midfielder. Would have been interesting to see how he got on against him, especially if he was coming off the bench. He would have had an impact. Dewar I'd imagine Dublin would have went with something like John Small on Dewar just to I suppose, cut down on his run and cut down on the ability to cut in and get these points, and maybe just try and keep him out of the game, keep him off the ball. So that would have been an interesting one. Definitely would have been a clash of styles as well. Of course, Keane O'Sullivan was playing that kind of sweeper-ish centre back role around this time as well. So it would have been interesting to see him in around with Brian McGuigan centre forward in that team. Yeah, so like Brian McGuigan, the playmaker, dropping out deep, would have been very, very interesting to see how he matched up against him then. But I think when the push comes to shove, the Sean Kavanagh one in on Dublin's full backline would have been the really interesting one, because again, that was a year after Rory O'Connor left the panel, and Rory O'Carroll, I should say, and Rory O'Carroll, like, he was able to deal with Donaghy, he was able to deal with the bigger players, but there was the doubt about whether some of the other Dubs could deal with bigger players like that. So it would have been really, really interesting to see the gun put to the head of them and just see how they would have reacted to something like that. But if you're squaring the two teams up against each other, in spite of some of the things I've said earlier, I would have the 2016 Dublin team. I think there was I think the 05 Tyrone team was the strongest of their three. And I'd have the 16 Dublin team, particularly as you mentioned, the All Ireland passage and who they beat, particularly that All Ireland semi-final defeat of Kerry, and just finding a way against Mayo. Dublin would edge it for me.
It was actually Tommy McGuigan, I got that just wrong. Just to look at a couple of other things, the substitutes. So Stephen O'Neill, he came back that year. He was introduced. Kevin Hughes, as we said, Brian McGuigan, Owen Mulligan, Colm Kavanagh, who's still part of the team. Then on the Dublin side, and just to look at the replay, Davy Byrne came on, Michael Dara McCauley, Bernard Brogan, Cormac Costello, Darren Daly, Eric Lowndes. So in terms of star names, it's actually possibly Tyrone on that front, isn't it?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, it's funny. Bernard Brogan was dropped for the replay, and him and Michael Dara both came on and made huge impacts. And then obviously you have Cormac Costello come on and kicking 3 points. I remember Jack McCaffrey, who was back from his travels, putting up a tweet that night and said that if he found Cormac Costello, he'd kiss him or something like that, because it was unbelievable. That was Dublin. That was Dublin then, and it's Dublin now as well. It's just the 4 or 5 lads that can come on and totally turn a game. But if you're going personnel, man for man, Tyrone, it's very, very closely matched. But you're saying Brian McGuigan probably wasn't. Sorry, apologies. It was Tommy McGuigan, the centre forward, as you said. Brian McGuigan probably wasn't at his pomp then, but Bernard Brogan probably wasn't at his pomp either. So you're kind of it's level off. They're 2 brilliant benches, two brilliant benches. But I think if you go down through the personnel on the starting 15s, Dublin will be just edging it for me. Apart from that Kerry result, and obviously the All Ireland final games, they were dominant passages the whole way through. And it just sometimes the scorelines can be deceiving with Dublin, particularly in the finals. You know, look at the 17 final. Mayo were very, very strong the whole way and looked like they were going to win it. And then Dublin win by a point, but kind of win by a point, not pulling up. But that's just the way they do it. That just seems to be the way they do it in finals. And did the same in the 16. So Dublin are just edging it for me.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll put it out for a vote on our game.ie underneath the video, and we'll see who goes through.